Well, good morning, everybody. Nice to be with you again. Jeremy here. We're going to be looking at some old friends today. I'm sure for the vast majority of you on the call, we're just revisiting and refreshing your knowledge and understanding of treating customers fairly, vulnerable clients, and whistleblowing. We've still got a few people who are scheduled to join us, but I'm very conscious that your time is precious. So I'll get underway, and as they join us, I will let them in. To prove my point, here we go. So we're going to be together for an hour today. So quite a lot to cover. But as I say, for the vast majority of you, this is going to be a refresher. For those of you who were on the call last week, I'm more than delighted to say that the winds have abated. We've got sunny skies, blue skies, so we're not anticipating any power outages today whatsoever. I should just point out before I get underway that this session is being recorded, and it will be available to Charlie and his colleagues within about half an hour of the workshop ending. And I know Charlie and the guys and girls are keen to make that available to you as a resource, particularly for those people who haven't been able to join the call this morning. So without any further ado, then let's get underway. And I wanted to share with you, just as always, the learning objectives. So we're going to start the session by taking a look at treating customers fairly. Just refresh your memory on the regulatory responsibilities that fall on you and the firm. Look at some best practice guidelines for how to embed those 6 TCF outcomes into the business. We're then going to take a look at vulnerable clients, slightly newer in terms of dealing with it, just a couple of years in, but this is something that, just like TCF, I think is going to be front and centre with the FCA for many years to come. We're going to look at the identification of potentially vulnerable clients and how to develop a policy. And again, some suggestions there as to what that might look like. And then we're going to finish the session by looking at good old PIDA 1998, which, as you know as well as I do, talks to whistleblowing and the process for whistleblowing, what constitutes qualifying and protected disclosure, and all that kind of good stuff. For those of you who then need to, there are some exams on the BAT system. More of that in at the end of the session. But just a shorthand for you, there are 3 exams, nothing at all to worry about. A couple of them are just 10 questions, multi-choice. The TCF one is double that, it's 20 questions. Everything you need to be successful in those exams, we will cover during the course of our session together this morning. So let's get underway then with our look at TCF. As I say, just to remind you, it's been with us for a long time now, going right back to 2006 when it was first introduced by the Financial Services Authority. As you know, when they were replaced by the FCA, it was adopted, and it became and it continues to be quite a central plank in terms of what we need to do in terms of the 6 outcomes in particular. But it's all about making sure that, as it says on the tin, everybody is treated with fairness. But more than that, it's about having clarity and transparency of information. As you know, all caused about because of what was perceived as a lack of trust in the industry with consumers. Moving on from that, as I say, it remains front and centre. It yet again features in the FCA's business plan, really focusing in that on how to embed that culture, and, as I say, equally important, the potentially vulnerable clients piece as well. From your perspective, particularly if you're in the advisory space or heading up a firm, this is a responsibility of firms to prove that you are complying with TCF. And one of the things you're doing to demonstrate that you are taking it seriously is being here this morning. So congratulations for taking the time out and being able to evidence that for the FCA. So let's just remind ourselves of where TCF actually sits within the handbook. In block 1, you'll recall there are 11 principles. If you have a spare moment and want to look at those 11 principles, you'll see that 4 of them actually talk to explicitly or implicitly things around TCF. And basically what they're saying, as a minimum, and it couldn't be more clear than that, could it? You've got to pay due regard to the interests of customers and treat them fairly. That's principle 6. It also talks to the fact that firms must conduct its business with skill, care and diligence, and for firms also read advisors and support staff in that. And principle 3 talks about the need to organise and control your affairs responsibly, have adequate risk management systems in place. Again, implicitly all talking to the concept of treating our customers fairly. And then again, a little bit more explicit, do you pay due regard to the needs of clients, and do you communicate that in a way that's clear, fair and not misleading? And as you see, when we start to look at some of the outcomes, those 6 outcomes, that's front and centre within all of that. So that's kind of where the 6 principles, the 6 outcomes are being driven from. It's from the regulatory principles that sit in block 1 of the FCA handbook. In terms then of the actual outcomes themselves, again, just as a bit of fun, last night I went on the internet, started having a look around some IFA websites. I guess 8 out of 10, the 6 outcomes are sitting there on the website. What is missing is the link for a consumer, for a client. So I'm wearing my client hat. So what does that actually mean? Yeah, I can see what you're trying to achieve in terms of an outcome, but what does it mean to me? So what I'm going to do is just to try and unpack that a little bit, and it may inspire some of you maybe to revisit some of your processes, including websites, and be more consumer centric in terms of what it might mean to them. So outcome 1, not telling you anything you don't know here. We've, as I say, we've grown very used to these outcomes. So can a client, can a consumer be confident that when they're dealing with you and your firm, then the fair treatment, TCF, is actually central to your corporate culture? So what do we actually mean by that? What are the FCA actually saying? When you strip it all down, basically what the FCA is saying is they don't want you to do this because you're being told through block 1, through PRIN, that you have to do it. They want you to do it because you believe it's the right thing to do. And I know 99.9% of us, actually, when we're running our businesses, of course, we want to do the best for our clients. That's the one defining feature that I get all the time when I'm dealing with advisors. You want to do a great job for your clients. And they want the firms to do that because it's actually in their DNA. And what they mean by that, it's totally embedded into not just your mindset, but all your business processes as well, whether it's at the advisory part of the process or in the pre and post-sale part of the process. And it's all about treating others like you would want to be treated yourself, with integrity and honesty right from the start, no hidden surprises. That's basically what the FCA is saying about outcome 1. So how can you achieve that? Well, it's all about transparency. Do what you say you're going to do. Keep your promises. Can you evidence, both for IFAC, those of you who take their audit services, and for the FCA, if required, that you are consistently applying the principles of TCF and that they're actually central and core to your firm? Yeah. So think to yourself, how could I show the FCA that I'm taking this seriously and it's actually part of what we do? So simply talking about it or being an advocate of it isn't enough. The FCA, as I say in all of these workshops, acts just like any audit firm. If they can't see it written down, when they talk to your clients, when they talk to you, if they can't evidence it, then they'll assume it doesn't exist, however good the talk. So the walk needs to follow the talk. Moving on to the second outcome then. This is more targeted at the product providers and how they market the products. But it does also catch us as well. It does as well in the advisory space. So are the products and services that we are actually advising on and recommending to our clients going to the right customer segments? So basically what the FCA is saying is, you know, don't sell somebody or don't advise somebody to take out a product if they've got no need of it. And, you know, I think when we looked at complaints last week, I think, you know, in terms of the IFA space, we're kind of the good guys here. The banks are still having to look to themselves in terms of some of this work, and they really caught a cold with the PPI scandal. But something that does sit more squarely on our toe is affordability. And you know, as an advisor, we have an integral role to play to make sure not only has the client got sufficient budget available now, but they've also got sufficient financial resilience to be able to maintain the premiums or commitment to those products in the long haul. So it's by that I'm talking to things like capacity for loss, which I know you know and understand, but all I'm trying to do here is demonstrate to you where the FCA are coming from in terms of some of these dry outcomes. So if I were looking at your business on behalf of the FCA, I'd be saying, okay, so let me have a look. Who you're targeting, who are your niche clients, who are your target clients. Let's have a look at how you segment your clients. And let's have a look at the types of products and services that you are promoting to them. The FCA do not expect you to be across the whole of the market. Some of you may choose to do that, but they think it's quite acceptable for you to target different client segments. But if you're doing that, you need to demonstrate to their satisfaction how the services, how the products, how the advice you're giving is actually focused on those segments. And you need to evidence that you've taken enough due diligence through the fact-find processes to really tailor the product both to their needs and to, here we talk about affordability again. And that anything you leave with them in terms of marketing materials, any pre, during or post-sale literature is clear, fair and not misleading. So relatively straightforward, I think, outcome 2. Outcome 3 is an interesting one. It kind of builds on that. And this talks to clients being provided with clear information and kept appropriately informed. And the key part here is the last bit of the outcome, because the expectation from the FCA is that is throughout the process, both before, during and after point of sale or point of advice. So that would catch things like ongoing review meetings and servicing and ongoing client interaction. So what the FCA is saying here is gone are the days where firms, providers in particular, could hide behind small print, where the clients kind of needed a degree to work out how products worked, and very much the charging structures were hidden away. For those of you who are veterans of the industry like myself, I can remember the heady days of capital units, where for the first 2 years, all commission was paid out to the advisor. There were clients, it was very difficult to get a handle on that. I know those days are long gone. We're very much in the fee space now, but the same sort of concept applies. Let's not hide anything. And as I say, the information must be very clear, must be kind of as Janet and John as we can make it for our clients throughout our interactions with them, not just at the advisory point of sale. And they need to have sufficient information to know exactly what it is they've signed up to, why they need it, and have enough information to understand that. So, you know, what you justify your recommendations through your suitability letter. I guess the acid test for that is if we were to sign a client up this morning, when they met with their friends in the pub this evening, could they actually stand and talk to them about what they've taken out, how much it's costing them, what their charges are, and why they need that particular plan. If they haven't, we may not be fully executing our responsibilities under outcome 3. So the focus of this outcome is for any information, whether that's written down or whether it's things that you're saying to them, is jargon-free as possible. It's clear, it's concise. That the charges, fees, interest charged on mortgages and loans is very explicit. It's clearly defined and it's relevant to that individual customer. Yeah, so when you're using your personalized illustrations and talking through the charging structures, they absolutely know what they're getting into and how long they're getting into it for. And of course, and we're supported with this with the materials that are made available at the point of sale. You know, is the customer aware of the key features? And I think it's beyond that really, it's how it actually applies to them. So not just the generic key features, but specifically when we're working through the illustration with them, how it's personalized to them, and using the information we've gleaned from the fact find to show how solutions have been very much tailored to their needs, wants, and aspirations. Which leads me nicely, I think, into outcome 4. So when consumers receive advice, we have to demonstrate it's suitable and takes advice of takes account of their particular circumstances. So what the FCA are saying here is, you know, you have an advantage here in terms of being an IFA, that you can look across the whole market as an agent of the client, and not only select the most appropriate product for them, but the most appropriate provider as well. Of course, the marketplace isn't solely inhabited by IFAs. Those of you who know me, you know I did quite a lot of work with St James Place. They're very much in the tide space. So when an advisor is making a recommendation, it can only come from the SJP portfolio, provided they can demonstrate that's the best possible solution relevant to the specific circumstances of the client. That's okay. That's kind of what outcome 4 is driving at. Within your kind of portfolio of solutions, is your advice sufficiently tailored and take full account of client circumstances? The other thing is to kind of wear your professionalism with pride, really. You'll be at least level 4 qualified, some of you may be even chartered. In the eyes of all consumers and customers, you are the expert. You know, that's why they're coming to you for advice. So if any of your clients ask you a question, you answer it, you're actually advising them. So, you know, that's something to be very cognizant of in terms of the FCA guidance. And once again, I just tip my hat to you. One of the ways you can evidence this outcome is that you've been trained on the TCF outcomes. So once again, as part of your annual fit and proper and your demonstration of that, you can claim attendance on this workshop as part of the evidence towards that. So again, let's just make sure any advice is truly in the best interests of customers. I know we all do that. Building, once again, shows how important the training aspect of this is, and that all staff, whether in their advisory or the office space, have information that they need to deliver TCF. And of course, this outcome also starts to talk to one of the other priority areas that we're going to be looking at, vulnerable customers, because we must take account of people's situation and circumstances at any given point in time when we're working with them. Moving on to outcome 5 then, let's just, so this is basically, you know, if we've advised clients, if we've put some products and some services in place for them, then it must be what they've been led to expect. What are we saying? Well, it's just like anything else. If you go to the high street, if you buy a car, if you buy a piece of electrical apparatus, you have got expectations about performance, longevity. how quiet it would be, what the extras are within that. So just like anything else, when we're giving advice, when we're recommending a portfolio of products, it has to do what it says on the tin. So as you can see, there's lots of interdependencies between these outcomes, and it just again reinforces the importance of at the fact-finding stage, really getting down to those soft facts so that we can tailor exactly what it is our clients are looking for. And this is about, I guess, the lack of any surprises. So no surprises. Everything is explicit. Everything is open and honest, not just at the start of a business relationship, but ongoing during that client relationship through the servicing meetings and after it ends, if that's the case. So this is about, as I said at the start, walking the walk, really. So delivering on your promises. Don't just talk it, walk it as well. It's about having the right systems, processes in place for you to be your own kind of internal auditor and arbiter on how well you are delivering TCF. Remember, whether you're a sole trader or whether you run a multi-advisor business, the onus is on you. It is your responsibility to actually demonstrate to the regulator you are adhering to the TCF requirements. So you have to have systems in place to consistently monitor and audit both the products and the services that you're offering to your clients. And key to that, of course, is getting customer feedback. Some of it is unsolicited. If you don't do so already, why not be more proactive on that front? It's absolutely vital to get feedback, because not everybody who is not totally satisfied with what's happened will actually give you the feedback. And it's important you get in and unearth that, more of that in a tick. And outcome 6 is probably the most self-explanatory. This is about post-sale barriers. It used to be quite difficult for consumers to move between providers, not just in our sector. I mean, the classic one was trying to change a bank current account. So you're seeing some very proactive work from the regulator now. So they've now got the current account guarantee that makes it barrier-free to change your current account with a different provider. You see it out of our sector as well, again in the mobile phone sector, where it used to be quite difficult to move from one provider to another. You can now do it just on the strength of sending one text message. So we don't live in a vacuum, and the regulator's saying, okay, so whether it's a bank account, whether it's a mobile phone, when it comes to advice, there shouldn't be any unreasonable post-sale barriers. So, you know, if you have any client contact that's unexpected, then, you know, don't sit on it. If you're handling a complaint like we looked at last week, don't think, well, I've got 8 weeks to deal with this. Get on it quickly, get it dealt with. So put your consumer hat on. And when somebody contacts you, think, well, what would be a reasonable period of time to deliver a response? If I were a customer, what would I expect? Yeah. And these days, the throwaway, put it in writing is not acceptable, whether a customer wishes to complain or whether they've got some other kind of issue they want to talk to you about. You know, we're living in the 21st century now of voicemail, of social media, and we must adapt our business models to cater for that. So as I say, probably the most explanatory in terms of the outcomes. It should be very easy. There should be no unnecessary barriers. And I guess what it means for you is, where you do have clients that for whatever reason want to make a switch, you should have sufficient resources in place to be able to effect that for them in a very timely way, so you can demonstrate that you're able to do that within a reasonable time frame. Okay, so all we've done so far in terms of TCF is just reminded ourselves, I guess, that it's been around since 2006. It's kind of one of our old friends, if you like. We've kind of got it ingrained, I guess, as far as we can into our business. Just because we've done that doesn't mean there's not some scope for improvement. Typically, things are always evolving and we can always look to improve. And what we've done there is we've just walked through the 6 outcomes. And my provocation for you was not just regurgitate the 6 outcomes, because when I look at those on your website with my consumer hat, I go, so what? So the piece in italics was designed as a thought starter, if you like, in terms of how you might want to bring those to life better for your clients. I talked when we went into the learning objectives about the need to demonstrate that you're embedding TCF into your own business. And all firms, regardless of that size, as I've said, have that same responsibility. You know, how you do it might be different, and some of the requirements on the sole trader may be slightly less onerous in terms of paperwork, but nevertheless, you have that same responsibility. You are equally on the hook. So when the FCA look at this, they say, right, remember what we talked about in terms of culture? It's absolutely key to their agenda that you do it because it's part, and they actually use that phrase, DNA. So how far is it ingrained into your culture? Do you have the processes in place that deliver TCF? And remember, this isn't just the advisory process, where we are supported with quite a lot of materials to support the advisory process. Challenge yourself. What happens pre-sale? What happens post-sale? What about all the other processes in terms of my interaction with clients? In what way can I demonstrate they meet all the challenges of treating customers fairly? And then what have I got in place in terms of MI that I could demonstrate to an external third party who's looking in at my business that I'm taking this seriously, that I'm monitoring the delivery, not just of the 6 TCF outcomes, but also how I'm integrating it into my business and what progress I'm making. And every now and again, what changes am I making to further enhance my TCF delivery? So in terms of the cultural perspective, really, when you're working in a business, if you're the sole trader, the book stops with you. If you're running a slightly bigger business, then it's down to the senior managers within that business. And the FCA will look to you, as they do in many other regards, for evidence of leadership here in terms of how you're getting it embedded into the business. So to what extent is TCF champion to staff, and what's your role within that? And you might go as far as actually appointing a TCF champion if your business is of sufficient scale. Again, from a cultural perspective, how integral is it to the way that you carry out your day-to-day business? And I keep talking a lot about process, but also from a cultural perspective, you would agree, I guess, it's all about your interactions with clients. You know, it could be the way that phone calls are handled, that correspondence is handled, how emails are actually dealt with, and inquiries. So in what way are they TCF friendly? In what way does your recruitment processes, your reward structures actually complement and support TCF values? Is there any element, for those of you who've got advisors working for you, reward the service element of the advisor's role? In what way does the support team and the service they deliver to customers, how well does that, in terms of any bonus payments, reflect and reward the delivery TCF? How confident are you that your staff have been trained sufficiently to ensure that clients are treated fairly? And I know that some of you will have brought your support people onto the call today, and others of you maybe want to do that on your own with them in terms of the standards that you're looking for. From a cultural perspective, it's not just how performance and standard service are measured, but what you think are important. What's important to you and your business in terms of measuring service standards. And I would suggest it's not just about collecting happy sheets and how wonderful life is and kidding yourself on. This is about lifting the bonnet and getting underneath. And there's a wonderful thing about continuous improvement, Kaizen, isn't there? Yeah, and that's used very much in the aerospace industry, where you don't really want things like engines going wrong or wings dropping off. Continuous improvement, yeah, there's always going to be something that you can build on and improve, even if it's currently a strength. How well does the information flow from a cultural perspective? And I guess not just to the client, but how well does that flow across the business as well? And how is it being championed, and how are you supporting the delivery of TCF? And an interesting one from a cultural perspective, in what way, if any, do you differentiate between existing and new clients? You know, there's a provocation. Yeah, there shouldn't really be any differentiation. So, you know, are all clients valued? Yeah, just because you've got existing clients and maybe they've not taken any advice for a while, and you know, they're not in the market at the moment for anything, are they still a client that's valued? Do they still understand that from a cultural perspective? Obviously, ultimately, the FCA is an auditor, and they will look for evidence in terms of processes. So they'll look to, you know, what are you charging them? They expect you to earn a living. That's no big deal. But are those fees and charges consistent? Are they fair? Are they reasonable across your different target customer segments? I've pulled your leg a little bit about the websites deliberately, but you know, do your communications promote TCF principles? And I think they probably do, but are they effective? I think that's the provocation. Is TCF embedded into the advice processes? I'm sure it is. How confident are you, though, you can continually evidence consistent client outcomes? That's the thing. When the FCA do visit, I'm sure when IFAC do their file checks, that's one of the things they're looking for, evidence of consistent client outcomes within your client segments. As I say, it's not just the advisory process. Is it integral to all admin processes? How are you treating clients? Are you treating them the way you would want to be treated as a consumer yourself? And in what ways are the senior managers, so it's back to the senior managers being on the hook, are senior managers applying controls? Are you on top of things like file reviews, knowledge testing? If interviewed by the FCA, what account could you give, and what specifics could you point to in terms of your knowledge and understanding that would satisfy them? I guess some of that would involve MI. So we've talked about culture, we've talked about process. Let's now look at MI. I'm not going to dwell on this because you would be the MI expert of your own business rather than myself. So there are three key headings, I think, where you could look to create positive examples of your embedding TCF into the business and continually monitoring them. Some very obvious ones in the sales space, I think, would give you an early warning and some trend analysis. Similarly, in the quality space, I've talked a lot about file checks, but you know, for those of you who have bigger businesses, how often do you kind of hop in on calls through your file checks and complaints? Can you see any sort of trends starting to develop? Certainly, I've worked in some big businesses in my career. Something we used to utilize quite a lot is mystery shopping. So is that something, if you've got a scale business where you think, let's just get an objective and independent view of the consumer journey in my particular firm. And I've kept banging on about this, but customer feedback is absolutely critical. You know, what was the journey like for them, right from that initial contact through the advisory process? And, you know, don't forget your existing clients that you've got a servicing relationship. What does the relationship feel like to them? You may feel it's a strong relationship. How, you know, ask them to rate it. How strong do they feel the relationship? Are you their go-to in all financial services matters? And what supporting documentation have you got in terms of customer feedback? The reason client feedback is so important and why it's so integral to TCF is you can get it right from the horse's mouth. I mean, basically what the regulator is doing is putting the consumer at the heart of everything we do. So by talking to them, we can get it right from the horse's mouth, their perspective on how we're fulfilling our TCF objectives, and there'll be lots of ticks in the credit ledger for that, but also importantly, where improvements are needed. As I said, it's no point getting just happy sheets with satisfied clients on, because satisfied clients aren't necessarily being treated fairly. There are two different wheels spinning. It also, for you in the business, will maybe throw up some potential risks, something that's not gone red yet, but maybe just blinking an amber that you think might be something we need to consider in terms of enhancing our process. And the biggie is that you may well have unhappy or disgruntled customers who are not necessarily complaining or you don't know about. The first you get to know about it is maybe when they have moved on and are working with somebody else. So that was our look at TCF. As I say, I'm very conscious that probably for everybody on the call, because of its longevity, that is not new. It's simply a refresher. But I'm confident that if you've scribbled down a few notes and were paying attention, you've got everything you need. That particular multi-choice test is 20 questions long for those of you who need to take the test. Let's move on to an equally important element of the FCA's business plan, which is vulnerable customer clients. And this is coming up strong and will continue to be important. You might be thinking, why is it important? Well, here's some stats from the FCA themselves. Just one that I pull out because we work in financial services, that half the adults in the UK only have a numeracy level of 11-year-old and below. That's quite staggering, really. And 14% of adults only have the median age of 11-year-old. So think about that. 14% of the clients potentially you're dealing with, when you're working through them with all those things like the suitability letters and the personal illustrations, may actually be struggling from a literacy and numeracy point of view. So we have to pedal quite hard. You'll all be familiar with the Financial Life Survey that the FCA took in 2020. Just at the start of the COVID epidemic. And when they took the initial survey, 24 million people had characteristics of vulnerability. But because of the impact of COVID-19, by October of the same year, that had gone up to just shy of 28 million. People who, because of the challenges of the epidemic, found themselves more vulnerable. So how do the FCA define somebody who's a vulnerable client? Well, as you can see there, it's a fairly straightforward kind of definition. It's just a client whose personal circumstances is susceptible to detriment, particularly, and this is the key bit for us this morning, when a firm is not acting with appropriate levels of care. Yeah. So I guess the exam question is, what are the appropriate levels of care? And that's what we'll be moving on to in a tick. So it's not been around as long as TCF. As you know, the finalised guidance came out around about this time last year, actually. I can remember looking at it, and that actually is a screenshot of the guidance paper. That became effective immediately. And as I say, it remains a key priority, and it's on target to be further evaluated in 2023 in terms of what progress the industry is making on it. For those of you who either have not looked at the paper for some time or haven't had the appetite to look at it, basically all it's saying in summary is that even vulnerable consumers, whether that's a permanent or temporary vulnerability, they should have the same outcomes as for other consumers. And this is where we're talking about the interdependency with TCF. They should be treated fairly as well. And they're looking for that across the whole sector, not just the advisory space. Everybody in FS is having to gear up for this. And basically, they're saying that this isn't a one-size-fits-all issue. They kind of know and understand that. So what they're looking for is a mechanism or mechanisms within which firms can identify the nature of a client's vulnerability and give them the appropriate level of care based on the characteristics of that vulnerability, more of which in a minute. Yeah. And to acknowledge that, I'm sure we all do, that that could well be different. You know, somebody with an issue on numeracy might be a very different needs to somebody who's maybe got a temporary mental health problem because of COVID or other reasons, or somebody who's got a more just been diagnosed with an illness or maybe become disabled. So whatever it is, we have to cut our cloth accordingly and to tailor our approach. And once again, what the expectation is here of the regulator is, they talk about this a lot, about it being embedded as part of the culture. So similarly, just as the senior managers, or if you're on your own business, you know, you're on the hook for TCF, equally on the hook for vulnerable customers. So you have to make sure that you've got processes in place and policies in place that would treat vulnerable customers fairly throughout their whole interaction with you, throughout the whole journey, pre, during and post sale, and all the interactions that go with that. So as we've said, there are different types of vulnerability. This is just some examples of that. I'm not claiming this list is extensive, but certainly the FCA have actually nailed an age to the mast here, and their definition of an elderly client is anybody who's 70 or above, which is an interesting definition of elderly. I'm sure we've got many very sprightly octogenarians who would absolutely dispute that definition. I guess the key point, joking aside, is that it's not about age per se, it's just as an indicator, really. So if you're dealing with clients who are more than 70, just to have it as a consideration about could they in any way be vulnerable. On the other side of the coin, somebody who's maybe 18-year-old, got a significant legacy left to them, have they got sufficient financial savvy? Are they vulnerable in some way? Do they need additional support from relatives or friends? The physical might be, well, should be more easy to spot. Impaired hearing or eyesight. Could be that somebody has some sort of illness, either severe or long term. The mental illness is a little bit more tricky to spot because people are very good at masking stress and anxiety. We've made great strides in the UK in terms of addressing mental health issues, but there's still a stigma attached to it for many people, as there is with literacy and numeracy. So most people have developed coping mechanisms and strategies to disguise that. So in terms of your responsibility to identify vulnerable customers, that's one where you need to be much more vigilant. In terms of emotional types of vulnerability, well, you know, it could be caused by a life shock, and they're the three biggies there: redundancy, divorce, bereavement. They're the biggies. Could be that somebody is in the sandwich generation, you know, and increasingly that's happening where they've got caring responsibilities, maybe got power of attorney, maybe got a young family themselves, and they're kind of sandwiched and caught in the middle, and that may be a bit wearing on them. Could be a cultural issue, could be that, you know, English is a second language, could be that, you know, due to upbringing or family situation, they've got no experience or understanding of financial planning. And certainly we don't help that in any way in the UK in terms of our educational system. There is no financial planning on the national curriculum at the minute. So those are some of the characteristics of vulnerability, and that 70 plus is kind of key, critical to remember. The FCA also identified what they have labelled 4 key drivers of vulnerability. And again, for those of you who have the test to do, these are important to remember. So in terms of key drivers of vulnerability, The first one, as we've already said, would be health. So any conditions, any illness that may be affecting our ability to do day-to-day tasks or to engage in the financial planning process. We've already said that life events can have a major impact on them. We talked about the three biggies, but there could be others, you know, including, it might not be as far as divorce yet, could be relationship breakdown. And for many clients, the retirement stage of their life cycle is quite a big life event and comes as a bit of a shock and makes them feel more vulnerable. The other one that we've not yet mentioned as a driver is resilience. So this is back to some of my earlier comments about checking out affordability and budget. And as you can see, once again, we've got some interdependence between vulnerable clients and TCF. So this is the ability to withstand financial shocks, yeah, or the emotional shocks because of the financial shocks. And we've got we should be having warning lights flashing now with inflation going like a train. The stats yesterday I was looking at from the Bank of England are projecting inflation to go north of 8% soon. So inflation going like a train, cost of servicing debt going like a train. Some of our clients might be less resilient. And finally, in terms of one of the drivers, the fourth and final one is capability, which leads us back to our literacy and numeracy. And it may be that, you know, some people aren't very IT literate, and, you know, everything these days, even those people who need to claim state benefits, if you can't have a computer, then you've got problems even for claiming universal credit. So IT is key critical in terms of engaging with the economy. So the four key drivers of vulnerability: health, life events, resilience, and capability. Good to remember that. In terms of spectrum of risk, this is a good infographic that I grabbed out of that guide. And I think this is good to have in our heads in terms of at the sharp end here. You know, people will come in and out of the spectrum of risk, you know, because of changes in circumstances, as we've just looked at, and they might move to the right hand and become more vulnerable to harm, or more vulnerable to not being able to cope with financial planning. And, you know, it's more likely that there'll be differentiating needs within the spectrum of risk, depending on the nature of their vulnerability. And the only takeaway I'll take from this is, just because you're dealing with a client today and everything's hunky-dory and fine, don't assume that in 12 months' time at the servicing meeting that things are the same as they were. And I guess my provocation to you from a vulnerable client's point of view, as part of your ongoing servicing, so your post-sale, is what are your early warning, what are your identification systems and mechanisms that you have in place for detecting any elements of vulnerability. So you do need to have a vulnerable clients policy in place. I'm sure this is something that that IFAC would help you with, because as you've seen, one size doesn't fit all. It has to be principles, not rule-based. And the key thing is you have to evidence how you're going to identify vulnerable clients, what your recording process is for having, once you've identified them, and how you're going to support them, and to record the fact that you're supporting them to evidence TCF. You should also consider how you're going to offer practical and emotional to staff, support to staff when dealing with vulnerable clients. My last proper job before I worked for myself was working for the Nationwide Building Society. We had 50 million customers at the point that I left. Unfortunately, many of those customers in the course of a year developed life-threatening illnesses such as cancer, and our frontline staff in the branches dealt with that, or in the call centres, on a daily basis. And we had practical support and emotional support through counselling lines and through specially trained counsellors who they could talk to mitigate the effects they were experiencing in dealing with people who were one step away from kind of palliative care. You can't just put a policy in place and leave it to kind of gather dust, like the old Carlsberg advertisement, remember, with the cobwebs on the phone. At least annually, you should be reviewing that and updating it. And look at what the guidance means for you and how you react for that. And if you are looking to refresh your policy, look at the FCA guidance that I've flashed up for you. There's definitely some support available. I've seen it on back from IFAC, and also the Personal Financial Society will also have some materials up there to help you. But it's not just about having that process in place, it's about how well you're going to embed it into your culture. So just like TCF, it's just something that you do. It's not a tick box exercise. And once again, you need to demonstrate you've been trained and you communicate on vulnerable clients. So another tick in the box for this morning's workshop, and I'm sure that's good. In terms of what you need to have in place, as I've said, clear policy, training, multiple channels of communication. So for partially sighted people, written communication probably not the most effective. Think about how else you could communicate with them. Look at other support you could give them. You could offer or suggest they bring relatives, third parties in with them as part of the advisory process so that they can understand better. You know, don't be a slave to the clock and the metronome. If they need extra time, give it them. Give them pre-sight of it, you know, and build in the opportunity, if required, for further meetings so that you've got more time to clarify, and make sure you've got that MI in place. So in many regards, vulnerable clients is building on a TCF. It's just being more specific in terms of vulnerability, how you identify it and how you deal with it. The final part is just a very quick look, and I know this is a refresher, just like vulnerable clients, just 10 questions for those of you who need to take the exam. So I think we know what whistleblowing is. It's any concern about wrongdoing or malpractice. You should have systems in place where this can be done internally, but there's many instances where whistleblowers have felt that wasn't an option that's available to them, and they've gone externally. And you can go straight to the FCA, go to the media, MPs, that kind of thing. And all whistleblowing is, it's about encouraging people to actually speak up where they feel that there's something untoward going on. In terms of where whistleblowing cases come from, I mean, you should have systems and processes in place, and you should be looking at this, and I'm sure you are. I thought the only thing of note really to pick out this slide, that 12% of all cases came from an internal audit, which I thought was good, but 11% came up by accident. So it suggests that across the piece, I'm not suggesting by any stretch of the imagination, this is your firm, but across the financial services sector as a whole, there's still more work to do in terms of our internal audits. And tip-offs still accounted for the majority of whistleblowing cases. So as you know, the PIDA has been with us even longer than TCF. We've got to go right back to the 90s. Although the Act's dated in 1998, it didn't actually get implemented until 1999. Now, as a refresher, I know you know this, its core aims were, as I've said, encourage individuals and provide them guidance, really, on how to raise issues, on how to whistleblow. Yeah, and it required employers to address those concerns, and this is where it talks to having appropriate internal controls and processes in place. And for individuals, because they might be reticent to come forward and point the finger, it actually gives them levels of protection as a content of making something called a protected disclosure. And I'll talk to you about that in just a tick. PIDA was strengthened by the Enterprise and Regulatory Reform Act in 2013, but the core principles are the same as ever. So what does the FCA say in this space? Well, basically it's saying that it would be good practice. We would recommend it's a whistleblower champion in a firm, or at least somebody that everybody knows they need to go to. You should be reviewing your processes on an annual basis as part of fit proper re-educating the staff and putting them on a course such as this. You'd expect on an annual basis at least to be auditing existing procedures, and remember the whistle graph there, some work to do in that space, and to instigate firms' controls and procedures. I'm sure you're all onto this in terms of any recruitment strategy, but you must make sure that any contracts of employment that you issue actually are compliant in terms of PIDA, and this is about specifically talks to areas of confidentiality and disclosure. Now, if you need to whistleblow, you are protected. You are protected if you meet these criteria, and this is key. That you believe is that malpractice is happening, it's happened in the past or is likely to happen in the future. You're revealing the right type of information, and I'll talk specifically to qualifying disclosure on the next slide, and revealing it to the right person in the right way, so-called protected disclosure. And it must be in the public interest. And you must believe that these events will happen or will happen. So as I said, let's talk about protected disclosure. So this is the Act saying, if you're a whistleblower, and it's a very broad definition of employees, contractors, trainees, agency staff. It's anybody really who whistleblows. They are given protection against dismissal, victimization, as long as they've acted in a reasonable way in raising their concerns. Yeah. So the reason you have to be cognizant of contracts of employment is that PIDA is an exception to the normal contractual duty in those contracts of confidentiality. But provided you as a whistleblower have acted reasonably, then you're given protection, and you're given protection through the industrial tribunal system, not through the court. And that's a key piece of information to remember. You do get protection, it's through the industrial tribunal system, I guess because you could feel victimized or you could be dismissed. And as long as you've satisfied your obligations, then there's unlimited financial compensation available to you. And the tribunal, if you've been dismissed, could insist that you're reinstated. There's a practical example of this. Jess Staley at Barclays, he was subject to a whistleblowing claim. Somebody in IT said that he was having a bit of a witch hunt in terms of somebody who'd reported him. He was dismissed, and he got a settlement of £285,000, which is, whilst it's unlimited, that's not a bad payout. In terms of qualifying disclosure, the types of issues that make it a qualifying disclosure are anything to do with financial mispractice, bribery, fraud, anything like that. Anything around health and safety, if you are not complying with any legal obligations, anything around miscarriages of justice, broadening the agenda out now into environmental risks, criminal offences, including our old friends, money laundering, bribery and corruption, anything really that's improper conduct or unethical, and any element of trying to conceal information about these. Any of those areas would fall under the banner of qualifying disclosure, and you would get all that protection that I've talked about, providing you follow this process. Always try and use in the first instance the procedures that exist in the firm. Try and raise your concerns in the first instance with the line manager, but if you don't feel you can do that, because maybe the line manager is the person wanting to blow the whistle on, then there should be that whistleblowing champion, or at least somebody within the firm who you know that you can approach. If that isn't possible at all, then I say it is possible for you to go direct to the FCA, and there is space on their website for you to do that. When you're making a report, it would be easier if you disclose the following things. Yeah, talk to the names, so name individuals who you believe are involved in the misconduct. Always give dates that you know about, and give as much information as you can. How, what, where, what is actually happening, how is it happening, where is it happening? Do you have any evidence? What supporting documents? And who else knows about it? Is there any element of concealment going on? So if it's in the public interest then you should report it to the relevant authorities. Yeah, anything that involves health and safety, any criminal activity, any FCA rule breaches, and any offences that are involved in unauthorised investment business like Ponzi schemes or alike. Don't fall into the trap of thinking whistleblowing is around kind of grievances. It's not. So grievances and dissatisfaction aren't actually in the public interest, and you shouldn't follow the whistleblowing procedure if it's one of these things. You know, you're not doing enough file checks and potentially you could be mis-selling. If you're breaching the FCA rules, it's not a whistleblower. You need to be open and honest with the FCA and go to them as you are with breaching their principles. Anything to do with the FCA, as you know, as part of block 1, it's about open and honest relationships, and anything in the normal course of an audit. So anything that's ordinary, run-of-the-mill disgruntlement with how you're being treated at work, that's not in the public interest. In terms of do's and don'ts, what does good look like? Just a quick refresher. Make sure you've got your policy and processes in place. Make sure you do annual audits, getting your staff trained annually. If you suspect any wrongdoing or concerns, get them reported as soon as possible through that process. Don't over elaborate, just stick to the facts and be vigilant. But you know, in terms of the other side of the coin, don't feel you have to wait till you've got every single scrap of evidence in place before you make a report. Don't make your report overly complex and use legalese. Don't fall into the trap of trying to use whistleblowing to settle scores. You know, that's for the grievance policy. So you've got a beef with your line manager, go through a grievance. Don't go through whistleblowing. Do not victimise others who, because through their best endeavours, raised concerns. And don't try and deter them from making external disclosures if that's appropriate. Don't feel that you need to be a detective in your own right. If you want any further advice and information, then obviously you've got your own policy. IFAC have got some good stuff on this too. I was looking at that myself on the VAT system just yesterday. Very succinct, very good quality information for you there. There's also an organisation called Protect. They're an independent charity and they do nothing else but PIDA and whistleblowing. There's lots of really good stuff on their website if you want an independent and objective third-party view on things like whistleblowing and reporting. Okay, so at the start of the session, we said we'd look at TCF, we'd look at the 6 outcomes and we unpack them in quite some detail and hopefully came up with some suggestions there. We looked at potentially vulnerable clients, how to identify them, what constitutes a vulnerable client, and how to develop a vulnerable client policy. And then we've just had a quick canter through PIDA. You've lived with this for a very long time. You probably know more about PIDA than I do, but nevertheless, good refresher, good to evidence that you've refreshed that knowledge. And I'm hoping that by now you're very confident to sit and pass those 3 IFAC exams if you need to. I know you know this, but just as a refresher for those of you who need a reminder, to go on and do the exams, just log on to the VAT system in the normal way. Under the T&C section of VAT, you'll find a section that's headed up financial exams. If you click into the financial exams, you'll see 3 exams waiting for you there. As I say, PIDA and vulnerable clients is just 10 multi-choice questions. TCF's double that, but you could probably have all those done and dusted within the half hour. So there we go. A very succinct look. Hopefully that's been a good refresher for you. As I said at the start, that has given you everything that you need to be successful in the tests. I successfully passed all 3 yesterday based on the information in these slides. Therefore, I'm very confident you will do likewise. So in the usual way, if you would like to evidence your attendance on this course today for your CPD file, please drop me a line. You can see the email address there, so I'll give you a moment to take a photograph of that or to scribble it down. Don't forget, as I said, this session has been recorded. So if there's any elements that you wanted to refresh yourself on, or you wanted to use it in terms of training your own staff or anybody who's not been able to attend today, then Charlie and his colleagues will make that available to you in the normal way. So for now, all that remains is for me to wish you a very pleasant rest of the day. Hopefully you'll get outdoors and enjoy some of the more clement weather that we're experiencing at the moment. I believe it's cybercrime next week, so enjoy that one. I'll be back in a fortnight's time when I believe we'll be looking at SMF 17. So for now, thank you very much. Charlie, would you like to say anything before we end? Okay, thank you very much. So off we go. Have a good day, everybody, and see you again soon.